All right, so today we're going to try to wrap our heads around this thing called the knowledge argument, which is a real doozy for anyone who likes to ponder the big questions, like what is knowledge and what is reality? And, uh, well, for folks like you who, love to think about these things.
Yeah, it really gets at the heart of what it means to know. Something like, can we really capture everything there is to know about an experience with just physical facts, or is there something more?
And to help us unpack all this, we're going to be diving deep into some excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on Qualia and the knowledge argument.
It's a rich topic, for sure, full of different perspectives and thought experiments.
Okay, so where do we even begin with this?
Well, a good starting point is this famous thought experiment in the knowledge argument that features a character named Mary.
Okay, Mary.
So Mary is a brilliant scientist, but here's the catch. She lives in a black and white room and has only ever experienced the world through a black and white monitor. Oh, wow. So she's like this walking encyclopedia of color vision, but she's never actually seen color. That's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah, it's a really intriguing concept, right? She's got all the book smarts, the wavelengths, the biology, the whole 9 yards, but she's never had this subjective experience of color. So to you, the philosopher, I got to ask, if Mary steps out of that room and sees a red apple for the first time, has she actually learned something new? Or was it all there already, just in a different form?
That is the million-dollar question, and it gets at this thing philosophers call qualia, those raw feels, the subjective experiential qualities of our mental states, like what it's actually like to see red or taste chocolate or feel pain.
So qualia are kind of like the unique personal aspects of experience that go beyond just the cold, hard facts.
You got it. They're those subjective qualities that can't be fully captured by just describing the physical processes involved.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this all ties together. So the knowledge argument is basically saying that even if you know everything about the physics and biology of color, there might still be something more to learn about what it's actually like to experience it.
Exactly. And that's the challenge it poses to the idea that all knowledge can be reduced to physical descriptions.
So as a philosopher, I'm already hooked.
Yeah.
But tell me, where do we go from here? How have different philosophical camps tried to tackle this conundrum?
Well, some argue that Marley doesn't actually learn new facts about color, but rather gains new abilities. This is called the ability hypothesis.
The ability hypothesis.
Okay, I'm listening.
So this idea says that knowing what it's like to experience something is more about know-how than know-that.
So it's like knowing how to ride a bike. You can read all about it, study the mechanics and physics, but until you actually get on a bike and do it, there's a whole dimension of understanding that's missing. Exactly. It's the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge. And in Mary's case, the ability hypothesis suggests that she gains the ability to recognize, imagine, and remember color skills she didn't have before.
So it's like her brain is now equipped with these new tools for interacting with color, but it's not necessarily that she's learned a new fact about color itself.
Right. But then there's another perspective called the acquaintance hypothesis, which throws a whole new wrench into things.
Oh, this sounds interesting. Tell me more.
So the acquaintance hypothesis proposes a third type of knowledge altogether called acquaintance knowledge. And this goes beyond both facts and skills.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It suggests that knowing a quail is about having this direct, intimate familiarity with it, a kind of knowing that can't be acquired through descriptions or instructions.
Okay, so is it kind of like the difference between reading about chocolate and actually tasting it?
You got it. I could study the chemical composition, the history, the production process, but the first time I bite into a chocolate bar, I gain an entirely new kind of knowledge.
An acquaintance with chocolateness itself.
Exactly. And the acquaintance hypothesis argues that something similar happens with qualia. You can have all the scientific knowledge in the world about what's happening in the brain when someone sees red, but until you've experienced redness yourself, there's a level of understanding that's just not accessible.
So we got these two competing hypotheses now. The ability hypothesis, which focuses on practical skills, and the acquaintance hypothesis, which emphasizes this direct experiential knowledge. And both of them seem to challenge this traditional view of knowledge as being purely factual.
Absolutely. They both raise questions about whether knowledge can be fully captured by just facts and descriptions.
Okay. But how do these ideas fit into this bigger picture of physicalism? The idea that everything can ultimately be explained in terms of physical stuff.
Well, that's where things get really interesting, especially when we consider this thing called the new knowledge old fact view. This new knowledge old fact view is kind of trying to walk a fine line. It wants to say that Mary does learn something new when she sees color for the first time.
But it doesn't want to ditch physicalism entirely.
Right. It's trying to reconcile these two things.
So it's saying like, yeah, Mary learned something new, but it's not a new fact. It's just a new way of understanding a fact she already knew.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Like, you look at an old painting and you've seen it 100 times before, but then one day the light hits it just right and you see something totally new in it.
I like that analogy, yeah. The new knowledge, old fact view folks would say that this, what its likeness of an experience, that phenomenal character, is actually a physical property.
Wait, so you're saying the feeling of redness is like a physical characteristic of the experience itself?
That's the gist, yeah.
Okay. I'm trying to wrap my head around that. So then how do we actually grasp this, what its likeness?
Well, they say you need these things called phenomenal concepts, and these concepts are grounded in the actual experience of the qual.
So basically you can't fully understand redness without having actually seen red, even if you have like a PhD in color vision.
Pretty much, yeah. The key point for them is that acquiring and possessing these phenomenal concepts can be described in purely physical terms. So when Mary sees red for the first time, her brain undergoes a physical change, allowing her to form this new concept.
Oh, okay. So like a software update for her brain almost, giving
Yeah.
her access to this whole new way of processing information. As a philosopher, I can see how this is trying to bridge the gap between subjective experience and a physicalist worldview. But I'm guessing this view has its critics too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Philosophy wouldn't be any fun without some good debate.
Right.
So one objection that's been raised is that this view relies on this idea of two different modes of presentation for the same fact, a physical mode and a phenomenal mode.
So like seeing the same object from two different angles, you're still looking at the same thing, but your perspective changes how you perceive it. Like I could describe a chair in terms of its physical property, height, material, color, but I could also describe the experience of sitting in that chair, which is a totally different kind of description.
That's a good way to think about it.
But are these really just different ways of describing the same thing? Or are we talking about different properties altogether?
And that's where the criticism comes in. Critics of this view would argue that these different modes of presentation actually involve different properties. So there's a physical property for the physical mode and then a separate non-physical property for the phenomenal mode.
So are we back to square one then? With qualia potentially being non-physical, does this view ultimately undermine its own goal of supporting physicalism?
Yeah, that's the challenge. If these modes of presentation do involve different properties, then the new knowledge old fact view might collapse back into some form of dualism, which is exactly what it was trying to avoid.
Okay, my head is spinning a bit. But let's not forget about those other hypotheses we talked about, the ability hypothesis and the acquaintance hypothesis. They must have their own sets of objections too, right? I mean, no philosophical idea just pops up without someone trying to poke holes in it.
You're telling me, so one objection to the ability hypothesis, for example, is that simply being able to imagine an experience isn't the same as actually knowing what it's like to have that experience.
Yeah, I get that. Like, I can imagine what it would be like to climb Mount Everest, maybe even really vividly. But that doesn't mean I actually know what it feels like to be up there. To feel the biting wind, the exhaustion, the exhilaration. There's this gap between imagination and real, genuine experience.
Absolutely. And there are similar objections to the acquaintance hypothesis. Some argue that even if being acquainted with a quail is necessary for knowing what it's like, it still doesn't tell us what kind of knowledge that is.
So we might be acquainted with a quail, but does that mean we have propositional knowledge about it? Is it some kind of know-how like the ability hypothesis suggests? Or is it something totally different, something that defies our usual categories?
Those are the big questions. And it leads to all these further debates about the nature of phenomenal concepts themselves and how they contribute to our understanding of qualia.
Man, this is heavy stuff. We've gone from this seemingly simple thought experiment about Mary in her black and white room to this deep dive into the very nature of knowledge and consciousness.
It's a rabbit hole for sure.
It really is. And honestly, I'm loving it, but I also feel like we need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
I agree. Let's zoom out a bit.
Where do these ideas about qualia and the knowledge argument fit in with other big philosophical frameworks like dualism?
Okay, so dualism, as you probably remember, is this idea that there are two fundamentally different kinds of stuff in the universe, mind and matter.
Yeah, and how does the knowledge argument play into that perspective?
Yeah, so dualists, they tend to see the knowledge argument as kind of supporting their view, that consciousness is something separate from the physical world.
Right. Oh.
They'd say that Mary's experience of color, when she finally sees it, it reveals something totally new about reality, something that wasn't captured by her purely physical knowledge.
So for dualists, qualia are like these little glimpses into a non-physical realm, like they're pointing to something beyond what science can explain.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. Dualists see qualia as evidence that there's more to the world than just the material stuff, the stuff that science can measure and quantify.
But dualism has its own issues, right? Like,
Yeah.
how do we explain how mind and matter actually interact? How can something non-physical have an effect on the physical world? It's like trying to imagine how a ghost could move a chair.
Exactly. And that leads us to this really trippy idea called epiphenomenalism.
Epiphenomenalism. Okay, remind me, isn't that the idea that qualia are kind of like side effects of brain activity? Like they exist, but they don't actually do anything in the physical world.
Yeah, you got it. And this raises all sorts of crazy questions. Like, if my feeling of pain doesn't actually cause me to recoil, then what does? And if qualia don't have any impact on our behavior, what's their purpose? It's a real philosophical head scratcher.
It really is.
Yeah.
As a philosopher, I'm struggling with the implications here. Like, does this mean our conscious experiences are just along for the ride, with no real agency? It seems to challenge our whole idea of free will.
For sure. It makes you question the relationship between our subjective experiences and the objective world, and it forces us to really examine our assumptions about cause and effect.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the ability hypothesis, the acquaintance hypothesis, the new knowledge, old fact view, and we even dipped our toes into dualism and epiphenomenalism.
It's been quite the journey.
It really has.
Mm-hmm.
So where does all this leave us? Have we finally cracked the code of qualia and the knowledge argument?
Well, the simple answer is no. The debate is still very much alive and kicking fur. Philosophers are still wrestling with these questions, and new arguments and perspectives are popping up all the time.
I guess that's part of what makes philosophy so engaging, right?
Yeah.
There's always more to explore, more to question.
Exactly, and I think the knowledge argument is a perfect example of that. It forces us to confront the limits of what we know and to really question our assumptions about reality, consciousness, and experience itself.
Absolutely. So to you, our listener, we leave you with this.
Oh.
Think about your own experiences. The taste of your coffee this morning, the feeling of the sun on your skin, the sound of your favorite music. Are these just physical processes happening in your brain? Or is there something more to them, something that science can't fully capture? What do you think?